the aim isn't to make everyone take part. The voluntariness alongside the playfulness is very important.
You're listening to Mobilizing Data for Justice, a podcast about how activists gather and make sense of data. This podcast episode is an edited interview with Amber Macintyre from Tactical Tech. She tells us about her recent work, what inspires her, and her hopes for the future.
I'm Amber and project lead at Tactical Tech in the Influence Industry project. And I got into looking at data and activism rather than what I would say is data activism. Initially, I kind of started from this role of data and activism because I was working at Amnesty International in their digital campaigns group. And I was tracking, like it was 2013, 14, and at that time it was getting very exciting to use data analytics. It had been around for a little bit, but now it was becoming like a routine for any charity or NGO to start looking at all these analytics you can gather from Facebook or emails, or also hosting kind of these email systems of membership. And over the year that we were doing that, in 2013, we also launched a campaign with Edward Snowden on the mass surveillance that took place by the sort of Five Eyes countries and the mass surveillance of citizens. And while I understand that kind of the characters involved are quite different, the premise of collecting data and analyzing it and profiling people felt kind of eerily familiar to the work I was doing. So I became very interested in the ethics side of what makes something surveillance and what makes it analytics. Are they the same thing? And if they are, they aren't, how can we do it better? How can we do it right? So that was how that was my first kind of moment of, I guess I was already in that space of data analytics and activism. But in this moment, I knew that that was an area that I wanted to spend more time on. And I ended up going to pursue then my PhD in that topic. So I looked at how is surveillance and how is analytics and when are they the same thing and when are they different? I guess my expertise became looking at how data is used in campaigns and how it becomes an asset to campaigns, how it becomes something that is this kind of data-driven approach becomes a kind of cultural method, a methodological approach to work, and through that kind of being able to examine it and research it and look at it from the outside. My work at Tactical Tech then was looking at who are the actors and companies and private firms working with data in election campaigns, and how has this data become an asset in election campaigns. Right now is quite a nice moment to talk about it because there's a full circle happening, because I started very much looking at kind of a ethical approach. Like I always wanted to look at whether NGOs were doing analytics or surveillance, not because I wanted to kind of uncover a scandal so much, but because I wanted to understand how we could do our work better. I was motivated by this idea that there are ethical ways we can go about using technology and how do we do it. But then in the kind of this next turn, when then I started looking at election campaigns, and just to say, so then the project that we worked on there was this data and activism project, was to produce kind of easy to understand, playful methods to engage with, and quite qualitative methods to engage with this topic of technology and data, to allow organizers and activists to start to think about the topic, to kind of learn about it, but also to put it in their own context, in their own worlds. So it was about bringing the topic in a more concrete and understandable way, so that, and then also like in a practical way, like getting activists to understand for themselves what they want to do and how they then want to use, I mean, they already know what they want to do, but how they would then be able to engage with data to achieve that, or technologies to achieve that. But then because I started looking more at elections, it became a lot more us and them. And because I think there's a lot more ability to kind of examine an election campaign as a citizen and hold them to account and hold them transparent. So it became less about this kind of meta approach of like, how do we do it right? What's the right approach? And it became more about just kind of documenting the ways influence can happen, and actually a lot more of the nefarious ways. And so through this, we have the Data and Politics project, and then that evolved into the Influence Industry project. And in the first case, we just wanted to document different types of tools like A/B testing and campaign apps and search engine optimization that was being used by political campaigns. And then in the second part of the project, we've really focused on these private firms, the private companies who sell their services to the political parties. So they'll end up profiting from supporting the political campaign to promote their campaign and to use the data to profile people. So it could be data brokers or consultants or media consultants. And from that, I think what we developed then was a database of over 500 companies working with election campaigns, as well as kind of a list of the types of services and tactics they use and which political parties they work with. From there, actually, just in the last year, so since December it went public, we started working to look at that topic again, but now broadening back into this little bit messier space. And for us, the topic in this case is climate, and we're looking at climate communications and the political information and the political influence that's happening around climate. And I think it's leading us back into saying, okay, well, these private companies that are PR companies are hired by gas and oil firms. We're also employing them in election campaigns, but it helps us actually then start to say, but we're also employing them as activists sometimes, these same kind of companies doing the same kind of tactics. So at the moment, we're just in this new phase of developing something, going back to that kind of more complex space that we're all part of influence, and we all have to think about what we're doing. I think it doesn't feel surprising now, but I think when I first learned about how ineffective or not real how inaccurate is probably the better word, how inaccurate the data about people is. So it still might lead to effective campaigns, and it still might do something that creates influence. But even some of the websites, they're quite upfront about what type of kind of percentage. I don't think they're as upfront as they used to be, but initially when we started researching it, they would put on it, for example, their certainty. So they would put a percentage of certainty for this fact. So they could say for sure, for example, what your name is and where you live. And then they might know from that, based on census data, kind of the likelihood of 60, 70% of your income and your education level, but it's not 100% knowledge. And then from that, they'll make further inferences, like they might know, for example, from financial data that they've purchased, whether you buy lots of online orders, but then they might make assumptions on that, on your personality type. And again, that bit becomes so much vaguer and so much less certainty in the data. And I think the reason I find it surprising is because it's kind of conflicted with this belief that data-driven is the way forward, that it's going to bring accurate results, that it's going to do something right for us. So I think that the confidence that even the companies have in their own abilities, while also being quite upfront sometimes about how inaccurate the data can be, and maybe inaccurate is not quite the right word, but how little confidence they can have in the actual statistics that came up with whether we're a type of personality or we're a type of person or what our habits are. Yeah, definitely. So the data detox guide are these kind of, initially it was a 7-day detox of your data. So initially there were 7 days in which you could follow the steps that it provided, and you could slowly remove some of the traces of data that you leave by turning off the location on your phone, removing an app, or leaving your phone at home for a day, changing your settings in your email accounts. So initially it was a 7-day kind of detox, but now it's a little bit, now there's lots of articles on lots of different topics, including politics and also climate. And the approach was really about, firstly, making it accessible and making it less scary to do something about the topic. Because I think when we wanted to first look at the topic and see what we want to do about it, it can feel overwhelming for anyone that it's not just overwhelming, but that we're helpless, that there's these big corporations that collect all our data, that the governments are complicit in it, that they agree that this can happen, that regulation allows it to happen, then what can I as an individual do about what data is being collected? And it can feel so overwhelming that we end up not doing anything about it. And I think the data detox kit was about breaking it down into single steps and kind of singular actions that you can take. So you can just do that one thing and it's complete. And it's also about making the language that's kind of purposefully, or it feels purposefully, obscured from the technology companies that kind of make it feel like it's going to be very difficult and it's going to be hard to do, which they've also, regulations have come in that force it to be easier to understand now. But it always was something that could be easier to understand. And it was just being kind of obfuscated in this legal language and technical language. So the point of the data detox kit was also to say, this is actually very accessible information. This is something that anyone can read about. Anyone that's using technology should be able to know about the technology that they're using. Absolutely. So the Glassroom project, which had a very similar kind of sense to trying to make data and technology accessible, but it came from a slightly different starting point, which was firstly to really challenge the idea that tech could be a fix or a savior to anything, that tech is this kind of democracy fix, politics fix, science fix, this technology as a solution was so popularly believed. And what we wanted to do with the Glassroom, or Tactical Tech wanted to do with the Glassroom, they were inspired by these big white open spaces of the Apple stores initially. And so that what they wanted to do was to take that same idea, it's this big open welcoming space in a high street, in somewhere very accessible, so that's where everyone is walking past each day. But when you go in, what it actually demonstrates are a series of artistic objects and data visualizations and videos, objects that are like exhibition objects that you can interact with, that again tell you, like the data detox kit, that tell you about where your data's, but this way I guess a little bit more informative and maybe a little bit more provocative with questions, telling people about where their data comes from, how much energy is used behind the data, what kind of people are involved in it. One of the objects was a book of all the passwords that have ever been leaked, so you could go and see if your own password was in this kind of Bible of passwords. It looked like a big tome of passwords. The Glassroom was much more about, rather than these easy steps as a data detox kit, it was more about provoking some thoughts. But again, with this idea that this information about technology should be accessible to everyone. And this is something that actually we've been really developing with the Elections Project through workshops and workshop activities, was to take this topic of politics and technology and apply playful ways of, and a playful approach to engaging with it. And one of the reasons I use this topic as the example here, I think it's across all of our projects, but the reason I like it particularly here is I think that talking about politics and technology, our aim was in general not to try and talk about whether a specific partisan group was right or wrong. Like our aim around politics, even if we have our own beliefs, our aim wasn't to come in and talk about who's right or wrong, although I think that you can't escape it sometimes. But the bit that was more important with our politics was just like, here's how political technologies work. And so you need to get people in a room and ask them to start talking about their values and to start talking about their politics. But you could get people from different political beliefs and different ideas coming in. And I think the playfulness has been a really important approach, because I think playfulness has a few features that I think are important. Firstly, that it's voluntary. So people only come in when they want to. And I think that playfulness has that as part of its kind of DNA of what playfulness is. And the importance of that around the Glassroom, where you can enter this exhibition space, but you can also leave it. The data detox kit, you can pick it up when you want to. Even the activities in our workshops, the aim isn't to make everyone take part. And I think this starting off point of the voluntariness alongside playfulness is very important. And then alongside that, I think the fact that it allows for kind of mistakes to be made, or for you to kind of stumble and get something wrong. So some of the exercises we have in this inform voter literacy space are exercises where you develop an idea, but then you can destroy it at the end. So you try and take your own values and ideas, and then at the end you can put them away, you can break them down, you can make mistakes. And almost because a lot of them involve objects or imagery, you can find a way to laugh at them, to make the mistake and then laugh, and it has a lot more lightness. And it has a lot more lightness, but it deals with very serious topics. And I think that this is like a contradiction that you can't get with other approaches, but with playfulness you can really achieve. Because of the way that data gets reported on and technology gets reported on, you can have people who come in who don't know what data is, and you can have people who come in who know a lot of information about how Cambridge Analytica worked and the private firms surrounding Cambridge Analytica. They might know the names of specific technologies. Like the average citizen, there's no average citizen knowledge on this topic from my perspective. And I always, actually, when I was doing my PhD, I always said, like, one of the acknowledgements was just to the people in the pub who just want to talk about it, because there's a lot of people who just want to talk about it. So firstly, like, this aim of kind of improving the knowledge was a bit more about just making it accessible if people didn't know, but it doesn't have to be the whole point. And what became more important in the scoping research was kind of something that's already out there, which is that it's a lot harder for certain groups, particularly women, particularly people of color, if they're in certain spaces where their voices won't get heard and they'll be talked over, and it's harder for them to kind of get to the point where they can express what they want to express. I mean, on technology, but also on political technology. And one of the kind of, when we were then going into like, why does that come about? One of the reasons was like, a lot of what people would say is that they just didn't feel confident enough. And so they would go along with what someone else had said. But they kind of knew that they wanted to have their own opinion, but they didn't really know how to get there and how to express it. And so I think the other thing about playfulness that I've always liked is that it also has space for reflection and privacy built in within it. Like a lot of the technologies we use as activists, if we're using the technology, privacy can't be part of it. Like it's going to be something, like there are ways to, and there are definitely steps we can take. But overall, we're using Zoom, like the data is going to be tracked. Zoom's going to know, the university might know if it's a university that hosts this space. You know, that there's so many ways in which we interact, and it will be recorded or surveyed in some way. And I think the playfulness and reflective ways can create very reflective spaces that don't need to go anywhere afterwards. And I think allow someone who maybe doesn't always want to speak up in a big group to then speak up just to themselves. And so we always integrate, for example, journaling or writing kind of notes to yourself about how you're feeling about what just happened. And also just even doing that before then you speak, like being able to write it down, and that also helps with kind of spaces where there's a lot of people who find verbalizing what they're going to say harder. And so you can have this space where you write it down first, and then if you want to, again, coming back to that voluntary thing, share it. So I think my aim and the project's aim in the end was to ensure that people came away knowing where the resources were to find something out themselves, and confident enough to go and find it and write down how they felt about it, or to express how they felt about it in whichever way they choose to express it. I think Tactical Tech has, in the short to medium term, there's kind of next five to 10 years, I think that continuing to document and like continuing the same kind of work where we document and produce qualitative, playful approaches to engaging with the topic so people can keep understanding. Because as much as I'd like to say that I would like to just start just creating smaller qualitative spaces, the technology is going to keep being made, and the focus on different ways AI is going to affect us, the different forms of AI that we're seeing now. All of that still needs talked about and presented, and it could only become more opaque. So we need to keep making sure it's transparent. We need to keep holding the technological actors to account. So I think around technology, it's still going to be important to make that information available. And I think making sure it's available to everyone, like making sure it's available to citizens and to journalists writing on it and to policymakers writing policy, that these different groups have that information. I think at the same time, for us, I know that the topic of climate is becoming more critical. I mean, it was always critical. It's been critical for a long time, but I think putting that at the center of what we do is an important step for us at the moment. And I think putting that at the center while allowing it to be representative of some of the other issues. For example, if we see the kind of identity politics that happens in digital influence from gas and oil companies, from lobbying firms, from election campaigns on climate, we can also see those same things used around LGBTQ rights and around migrant rights. So we hope that climate's, while it's an important focus, that it's also representative of some of these other narratives that are forming what's happening with digital influence technologies. Something that I've been reflecting on a lot is my own kind of desire to go more local as everything is happening, like to take myself away from technology and to make art with a local community of friends. That would be like a dream, which might just be getting older. But also I think that I was given a challenge recently to that feeling, and I'm glad, because the challenge was that we can't leave other groups behind at this time, and we have to keep thinking about what this looks like on this global level. And I think promoting qualitative approaches, but still documenting and researching the technological ones, and still allowing what we create to be of benefit to more than just the group of people around us is really important.
Mobilizing Data for Justice is a podcast by the Data Justice Hub at Concordia University and the University of Winnipeg, in partnership with Harbinger Media and with funding from the Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council of Canada. Production by Elena Rowan, an interview by Chris Hurl and Kevin Walby. From the Data Justice Hub, the Mobilizing Data for Justice team is me, Elena Rowan, Chris Hurl, Marius Senneville, and Kevin Walby.